Broadcasting live from the blood-stained floors of the world's most dangerous martial arts dojos to the pages of the world's deadliest comic books ever made. This is the world's deadliest podcast.
This is Uncle Victor, host of a new pulp magazine out now called Strange Adventures. This book's gonna blow your little minds, kiddies, cause it's done in the classic style of Savage Sword of Conan, The Vault of Horror, and the Eerie magazine. Quiet back there! So if you're a fan of John Buscema, Bernie Wrightson, or Frank Frazetta, then this is the mag for you. Get it on Kickstarter. Strange Adventures Comic Magazine by Jesse White. And tell him Uncle Victor sent ya.
So today we have with us Jesse White. Jesse is a comic book illustrator. He is an expert on Conan. On John Buscema comic books, all kinds of different subjects. He's got a really cool YouTube channel. I believe your YouTube's called like Pursuit of a Polymath. Is that the name of it, Jesse?
Yeah, Pursuit of a Polymath. Yeah. Pursuit
of a Polymath. If you go there, I'll link some of the stuff in the description. He's got a lot of really cool videos about different historical and interesting parts of comic book history. But he also has a project that we wanted to talk to him about on Kickstarter called Strange Adventures. That's the right name, right, Jesse?
It is.
It's basically like it looks like kind of like a pulp magazine comic book throwback to like the old Savage sort of Conan mags and creepy and eerie, the like Warren magazines from the 1970s. And he's trying to fund it right now. The project's still live on Kickstarter. We'll have it all linked in the description. But Jesse, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam, and Jake as well. It's really great to be here. Like you said, I am an illustrator, but I'm also the creator of Strange Adventures. I wrote one of the stories, and I scripted all of the stories because a number of the submissions that I had, and I don't know if you've experienced this with comics creation yourself, but they come in a format that's not actually acceptable as a comic. They come in often from amateur writers in a sort of a format of a short story. So I've done all the scripting for every comic. You know, it's a different thing, a short story and a comic. So I did all that work, and I started this project off because I saw an obvious vacancy in the modern comic market. I mean, that black and white style from the 70s that you mentioned, the Eerie magazine, the Warrens, especially Savage Sword of Conan, those illustrators, they drew their comic books knowing it was going to be in black and white. So the inking is different. They use a lot of masked blacks, and they use a three-dimensionality that's not present when you see a really highly rendered color comic. Illustrators today, they draw their pictures and they look basically like a coloring book picture when they're not colored, just fine lines. But the illustrations from the 70s, they were intended to be black and white, and I'm trying to bring that back because I don't see it in the market anymore. Do you?
No, I think you make a good point. Now with the digital coloring and being able to render everything so intensely in comics, they don't really rely on the line work, the rendering, the light source and placement of their shadows and everything to frame a picture and tell the story. They kind of just leave it in the hands of the colorist, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you can look at them when they're bare, when the color hasn't been added. It's really hard to see what's in the picture. It just looks a lot of tiny little thin lines that are really, really highly detailed. And you mentioned John Buscema. John Buscema is my idol. He had this maxim that he used all the time, and his rule was to keep the drawing open and not to, quote, noodle. Noodling is the standard these days. Noodling means putting a ton of details in and not having the courage to leave it blank. And John's rule, and I'm trying to adopt it, I practice from him every single day in my pursuit of it, it's that if you leave it open, it proves and shows that you know exactly the minimum needed to tell the story. And he says a lot of guys, and he sees them even back in the 80s, they put a lot of hatching and a lot of, quote, noodling to cover up the fact they actually have deficiencies in their knowledge of anatomy. And you can tell that when you see a drawing and you see, from a trained eye that, that eye is in the incorrect place, or that breast is not curving around the way properly. And if you cover it up with a bunch of little lines, you can maybe get away with it. But John's, if you look at them, they're pretty open. I mean, there's barely anything there, especially when it's his own inking. I'm not talking about John Buscema inked by Rudy Nibriz. That turns into a bit of noodling. I'm talking John inking John. It's very open.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. For people who don't know, because we have a lot of casual comic book readers that listen to this, let's talk about, I guess, who was John Buscema? Some people that are listening to this may have never heard of him before.
Right.
So if you were telling somebody, like Jake, I don't know if Jake's familiar with John Buscema as much. He's more the wrestling expert, and I'm more of the comic book guy, but Jake does know quite a bit about comics.
Yeah, but I'm the canary in the coal mine, because really I'm not as deep into it as you guys are. I mean, I clearly know the name and I know of him as being an artist and working with Marvel and stuff, but you guys are so deep down talking about lines and all this kind of thing. And I'm just admiring the boobs and stuff on the Kickstarter page.
yeah. Jesse draws some great voluptuous women. I really like the way he handles those.
Let's talk about that later on. I'd love to talk about that.
Okay.
So guys, go to Kickstarter. There's a lot of cleavage. The art is amazing. What is the page so people can get to it?
Well, it's a big long alphabet soup. So I don't personally. I'm not able to state it. I could find it out and we could put it on your.
So if you go to Kickstarter and look up Strange Adventures Comic Magazine, then you'll see it.
I will do it. And you can probably put my name as well, which is Jesse White, White, just like the absence of color. That's me. And you'll see it. It's a real pulpy looking mag, and you'll see lots of boobs.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Jesse, how many people bug you about Breaking Bad? Because you've got the first name of one character and the last name of the other.
I used to be a school teacher, and I quit the job 7 years ago. So it's even more than that, right? So I wasn't a science teacher. I was a shop teacher, and
cool.
It's another skill that I've got. That's why my channel is called The Pursuit of the Polymath. I do so many random things, right? So I quit the school teaching, but I every so often go into the school to substitute, and every time I go in, and they don't know my first name, but they know Mr. White, and some of the kids know that my name is Jesse, and it invariably comes up every single time, the Breaking Bad references. And to tell you the honest truth, I haven't watched it yet, so I gotta.
Oh wow, yeah, that's funny. Sorry, I didn't mean to sideline everything, but I just heard your name and I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So if you want to refer back to John, should I talk about him again?
Yeah, let's. Why don't you explain to people about John, who John was, why he's significant.
All right. Well, John Buscema was the illustrator that made popular many Marvel properties, and he created the looks of many of them that you probably know if you're a Marvel fan. He started working in comic books in 1957, back when Marvel was called Timely Comic Books, and he worked there originally, and it was a different scene back in those days. I mean, comics were quite a bit different, and John couldn't make a living at that. He worked under Stan at that time, Stan Lee, but he couldn't make a living, and he quit the job, and he became a legit illustrator. And John was trained at the Academy in New York City, and he is a legit illustrator. And I want to draw that point out, because in those days, and I'm talking, this is like the silver age of comics, and John went into the bronze, those illustrators were by and large real trained illustrators, not comic drawers. And that's a big difference today, because what you end up having is a sort of a self-referencing loop as the years pass on, where people that are comic artists train by copying comic artists. John did not do that. John trained by being a proper illustrator, and you can tell it in the way his illustrations played out throughout the years. He just happened to be a comic artist, and that was what he did. They call him the Michelangelo of comic books, referring to, of course, Michelangelo Buonarroti, the painter, right? He's the par excellence of comic art. And he started in 57, but when he came back later in Marvel, it was the 60s, and he didn't have the same awareness of what comics were, because he'd been away for a while, and Stan headhunted him and asked him to come back. And he came back, and he took his legitimate illustrative style with proper anatomy and really a powerful ability to draw the human figure and animals, but it didn't play out properly because he was used to the kind of styles that were about 10 or 12 years old, maybe even 17 years old at that time, and which was more like the kind of illustrations that you see in the kind of Hal Foster style, like Prince Valiant. Do you know Prince Valiant?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of Hal Foster, and
I love Hal Foster.
Yeah, me too. I look at him all the time. But you're right. You make a good point. My understanding was like before Stan Lee got a hold of John Buscema, he was like doing like romance comics like you said, the more old fashioned style, and the Marvel was Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby had kind of reframed, made a new paradigm for like what a comic book could look like with all his crazy, super dynamic like action poses and weird looking characters and everything.
You got it, and that's exactly what Stan referred. Well, it wasn't actually Stan; it was John Romita Sr. referred John Buscema to Jack Kirby's work, and so John took his knowledge of anatomy, and he sat there and studied Jack, and he merged the two styles together, and he came out. And his start was really noticed in the Avengers. He worked on a number of things before, but the Avengers was where he really came into his stride in the 60s, and he did a ton of those early ones in the run, and I'm working on collecting all those ones. He brought the first appearance of the Dragon Man to the comic book, and he worked through that, and his other noted stuff started playing out through the 60s. The Silver Surfer is a major standout in those ones. He designed a number of characters that are in the sort of periphery of the Silver Surfer. The Surfer was designed by Kirby, but John made him like a surfer, like leaner, and he brought that melancholic sort of romantic look of sort of constantly thinking about his home in Zenla, and you can see the scenes where he was referring to the Vision from the Avengers, where they're both bald and they're both similar, and he brought like a sense of pathos to these characters. Like, you remember that specific shot of even an android can cry, and it shows a tear falling down the cheek of the Vision. He did this with the Silver Surfer, and he designed Mephisto, the first character, the big villain of the Silver Surfer, and those were through the 60s. Now, I might pause there if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I know. You make a good point. There's a lot of things you've said that the modern comic book readers I don't think are really aware of. One of the things that's interesting is it's like Jack Kirby. He was basically like the way he drew, in my opinion. Everything he did was kind of like his own abstraction of reality, meaning. Absolutely. Nothing actually looks like what he draws. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's able to draw so quickly and do pages so fast, is because he was drawing basically his own cartooned or abstracted version of the world. So nothing had to be totally correct anatomically. Nothing had to be completely right as far as, the way he was placing an eye or a mouth or a nose or whatever. And the interesting thing about John was he started taking Kirby's dynamic, sense of composition, but using his real training in illustration and drawing it more closer to life.
That's right. And he was very slow at the beginning, but back in his timeline, when we get into the Conan days, he was doing 6 pages per day. 6 per day at the end of it. He was
holy cow.
A superstar. Working on 3 comics per month. Like, the guy was unbelievable. But the truth of the story is, the first thing he did in 57, it was called The Kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln. It was a absurd story about people that's robbed from his tomb. He said it took him an entire week and he got half a page. Sam, have you ever been in that position? I sure have.
Yeah, that's insane.
An entire week and you got half a page of drawing done. I don't know. I remember those days. It's bad. Like it's because you don't know how to draw. You make mistakes and you have to keep undoing and redoing. And so John was an incredible success story. He rocketed his way from really slow to very fast by the end. And we'll fast forward to 1970 when the property for Conan was bought by Marvel. Now, Conan, at that point, had been produced in the Lancer novels with the covers by Frank Frazetta, which everybody knows. And Conan, of course, was written by Robert E. Howard back in the Depression times. And it was a sort of a property that had passed through a variety of hands because Howard killed himself. But Glenn Lord, at that time, was the man that had the rights to the property. And he was interested in expanding Conan as an IP into different mediums so that Robert E. Howard himself would become better known. He was very dedicated to Robert, and he was also a Texan, Glenn Lord, and he was caring most about the state of Howard, not as a monetary thing, but as an artistic thing. He wrote the book called The Last Celt, which is sort of an a biography of Robert E. Howard, and he cared most about that man's legacy. So to that end, he offered it to a variety of people, and Marvel was interested in taking it at the time. Do you have anything to add there, or shall I keep going?
No,
well, here's the only thing I know about John Buscema. That when I was in high school, I wanted to draw comic books. I never really pursued it. I just, dicked around, and I'm not serious like you guys. But how to draw comics the Marvel way, man, that was like constantly checked out at the library. I was always so pissed off because I never got to check it out, the book that he wrote on Illustrator.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. That came out in the 80s. That's an incredible book based off of a school that John was using to train people to teach. And that was, following his tenure on Conan, because Conan was really the thing that made him, well, not made him, but brought him into a lot of people, at least my awareness, because I'm not a superhero guy so much. I'm more of a sword and sorcery guy, and I really was drawn to these Conan books. But how to draw comics the Marvel way was like, again, just like you say, constantly checked out of the library. I mean, I got that in whatever year it was, 1984 or 3, from the library, and I sat there and worked at it for every day, and then I would be totally depressed when I had to take it back. And as soon as it was on request, I couldn't get it again.
Yeah, it was seriously like the most popular book ever. Like I think I had it in my hands for like a week or whatever the term is, and then like shit, I got to send it back. And this is of course before Amazon and before Barnes and Noble or whoever would let you do special orders of books. It was like impossible to get your hands on.
Yeah, that book was when I saw that book, it must have been the late 80s or early 90s, and that was it was probably the late 80s because there was no internet, and that was the first time like I'd seen like pencils of a comic book page, and seeing like, and I was like, wow, and I was like, I can't believe how beautiful his pencils looked.
I know, it's the same. I felt the exact same, and then these sort of absurd things that you don't understand, that like, for instance, a comic is not drawn at comic size. I didn't understand that, and when I read that comic, I was like, what? Of course, it's drawn at 11 by 17. That's totally different, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
I fully agree.
That's mind blowing. I'm down in San Diego. That's where I'm born and raised and lived my whole life. I still live here, and so I grew up going to San Diego Comic-Con.
Awesome.
Every year. Now I quit going in about 2008 because it's not really a comic book convention anymore. But and it's really crowded now. But
yeah.
I came across Conan. I knew about the movie with Arnold, and I tried to watch it on cable television a few times as a kid, and I never really got through it back then. And then at San Diego Comic-Con, they had Conan and the 25-cent bins. So it must have been around the early 90s because they were They were, I believe, the run was pretty much done. At least the John Buscema one was.
Yeah.
And I probably picked up over about 100 of them at 25 cents a piece. I still have them all. And they're all worth quite a bit more than 25 cents now, too. Which is pretty cool.
The best thing about San Diego Comic-Con, those sellers that come from all over the U.S. and put their shop up there, man. I bought some good ones there myself. You got a good deal, 25 cents there.
Yeah, man, that was back when, I mean, those guys don't even go anymore, but Mile High was there, and Bud Plant, and all those original comic shop owners like Robert, Bob Beerbaum, and were always there, with like just boxes and boxes of comics, and my understanding is now none of those guys, a lot of them I don't think a lot of them are too old or dead, but even like I believe Mile High and stuff no longer even goes to San Diego Comic-Con anymore because they just can't sell anything.
It's incredible because it's not really about comics. I mean, I went in 2000, I think, or it was 2001, the year before John died, and John was there. I met him, and I'm so thankful of it. I mean, I live up in northern Canada, so it's like driving across two continents, essentially, across all of Canada and then all through the U.S., and I went straight down the highway, and I was so thankful that I got to see him because he died the next year.
Oh, wow. How was that? Yeah, how was that meeting him then?
Oh, it was tremendous. I only got a very small chance to talk to him, but it was still the greatest moment of my life. I saw him do something that was, I've told it on Twitter before, but it's a funny story about one of those comic sellers that, you were just talking about. He wasn't anybody like Bud Plant. He was just a private guy, but he had a setup sort of right near the entrance, kind of, and it was set up like a shop with the kind of cabinet all around the front. And John was standing there, just mingling, and there was people all around him. And Dolores, John's wife, was there. And this guy said to him, kind of rather, forwardly, that he was an inker, and that he wished more than anything that he could ink one of John's renditions of Thor. And this was John way past doing Thor. I mean, we didn't mention Thor in our biography of Conan, but he did a lot of Thor. And John was a really gnarly guy, and he's often through his life said he hated comics. I don't think he hated comics, but he said that. And he said, "I'm never going to draw Thor again. Never." And the guy sort of stood way back and sort of said nothing. And then the next day, he showed up at the booth and slammed a drawing down on the guy's desk. And he'd drawn it in the hotel that night. He went, "Here," and gave it to him.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, man. What a great story.
It's amazing. So he was a gnarly guy up front, but I think he was a very kind guy underneath it all. I think he'd been in the business for a long time, and he saw so much stuff that was probably hard. And he had an antagonistic relationship with Stan a bit. I mean, they were friends, but he was his boss. So I think John was very much of a kind of an old world kind of a mindset. He was doing it as a job, and I think that I really respect that personally. I don't think you need to make it into a big fancy pants art thing. He did it because he wanted to illustrate for his life, and that's what he did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. And so one of the reasons why we're talking about John Buscema so much is that Jesse, his style, his illustration style reminds me very much of John Buscema. And if you do go to his Kickstarter for Strange Adventures and look at his art, you can see that he's really diligently studied John Buscema and his style of illustration and how he would handle his figures and his composition and his rendering. And that's one of the reasons why I really like the project you're doing. I love the art that you're doing in it. It's really cool. And I love John Buscema as well. So it's like two things that are really awesome. That's true.
I appreciate it coming from an artist like yourself. I mean, it's one thing when your wife likes it, but it's another thing when there's another guy out there that's a drawer that knows what he sees as something that's quality in it. It really touches me to hear that. I hope that I'm able to make all the fans that come up, fans of John that come out and see it, make them feel proud of me, because I've tried really hard. And I'm not a John Buscema clone. I don't feel like that. I just use his style to inform the way that I do it. And there's only one John, but I want to learn from him, and I want to be his heir, sort of.
Yeah. I think that's great. That's awesome. And
I think it's pretty incredible what you're able to do without color. I mean, it's like, I'm looking at this one panel from the Kickstarter page. The one, it's like the crime scene where the hands and feet are cut off and there's all these naked bodies and stuff. I mean, the layers of the colors you go from pitch black to grays to some line hatching stuff, and it's just so dynamic to look at. And you didn't even use any color at all. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you very much. That's from the pulpy noir story that I've got. I've got a weird occult noir story in there, and the format of the magazine is it's one of those styles that you saw in the old days, sort of like the Twilight Zone. Several stories within the context of one program, and this particular comic, Strange Adventures, has 9 stories in it, and they're all different genres. That one that you're talking of is weird occult, so it's set in 1947 in Hollywood, of all places, of course. Where else would a gumshoe be than in Hollywood? And it's written in that point of view. Like, I think the first line is like, casing a murder scene in the hot summer of 1947 wasn't my idea of a good time. Something like that. It's like
it's like a hard-boiled detective kind of thing. Totally
right. Yeah, right. So there is an opportunity for me through each of these 9 stories to do kind of a different style of treatment with the black and white. And that one particular, you're talking about all the different halftones in it. I used an old technique that's long gone, and Samuel probably remember this. It was called a zip tone, and the illustrators used to use it in the old days. And it's basically a transparent piece of vellum that had a pattern of either squares or consecutive circles or very small lines. And they would cut it out with with an X-Acto knife and lay it over a place where they would want a halftone. And you can see, if you look at that picture, those parts that appear gray are really just black lines, very close to one another. And
you have the lines are going in different angles. So you have the car in the background that looks like maybe a Corvette or an old 50s Corvette or something. Yeah. But those lines are going one direction, and then the actual lines on the ground are going in another direction, and it just gives it so much depth. And then you look through the window, and you can see the skyline and the barn doors in the back, and the lines are curved back there. It's really dynamic drawing.
Thank you very much. It's a very meticulous and difficult thing to use, zip tones, and you have to be careful because you can really make it into a tangle that doesn't make any sense. But I didn't use zips on the other comics. I mean, the Jungle Adventure one, which is kind of the flagship story, that's called The Trials of Ingretta, and that's the one with the cleavage and stuff. That is basically done in the real straightforward John style. I brush ink everything. I don't use the computer in any way at all. I use my hand to the whole thing. And if you go to the Kickstarter page, you'll see there's a little video of me inking Red Sonja there, a little fan picture that I made. It's not my own character, that's Red Sonja, but I did it all with a brush. And The Trials of Ingretta is done that way, like pure Savage Sword. That's my sort of love song to the Savage Sword of Conan, which was done with the brush when John was doing it. And you can see it's just black and white, that one. There's no real halftones in that at all. And it's all done with the kind of feathering, you use the brush and you sort of bleed it off as you go, lift off as you stroke, and it creates a kind of a tail and a pointed line that you can use as kind of a place where the black is transitioning to the white.
I don't know if you guys saw this back in the day. I don't mean to interrupt, but it just flashed to me. You know what this reminds me of? Was the old Creepshow graphic novel from the early 80s.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Exactly. I got the
that's totally what it is. With the bugs crawling down the guy's mouth, and it reminds me of that style so much.
Well, there's many things that are sort of Easter eggs in this. Like, for instance, in the Creepshow, they had the character the Creep, right? Yeah. I have this character called Uncle Victor who introduces the stories. You can see him on a couple of the splash pages. He looks like Uncle Frank from the movie Hellraiser. I don't know if you guys are horror fans, but do you know Hellraiser? Yeah. So Uncle Frank is this horrible uncle that goes into where the Cenobites have taken him to hell, and he gets out. He gets formed back with his skin barely on. And I drew Uncle Victor kind of like that, this skinless man. So he introduces it. He talks with this horrible voice. Like, I have a little audio ad where I make my voice to sound like Uncle Victor's voice. Maybe we could play it at the end. I don't know, but
yeah.
He says these funny things, just like the creep in the Creep Show. Basically, he says, "This is a filthy story set right in the time for when you were ready to be frightened." You know, this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Your Uncle Victor's like a bad case of herpes, gone but not forgotten. You know?
Yeah. No, you do really good voices, man. Because if you guys don't know, on Jesse's YouTube, he does dramatizations kind of comics, and you did one about this kind of obscure Frank Frazetta story, and like this lost art that he found in the reprinting of some of Frank Frazetta's like sketchbooks and stuff, and he does like a kind of a voices and stuff really well. But yeah, that I love that idea of like you got like kind of like your own sort of crypt keeper type character introducing the stories, because I used to love all those old EC comics.
Like, if you think of Creep Show, do you remember the show called The Crate? The one that was about that horrible...
Yeah, the monster in the box, and then it drags people in the box, and the lady is like trying to seduce the guy. And I remember that one vividly.
So The Crate has, as its credit for the makeup effects, one of the heroes of horror, Tom Savini. Now, Tom Savini, if you know him, has done all the horror makeup for George Romero's zombie movies, and he's in his own right an actor. He's in From Dusk Till Dawn, and he's in Land of the Dead even. And I made a comic story in there, one of the 9, called The Final Test. And if you scroll up to look at him, that character is Tom Savini. I made Tom Starr as the barbarian in that story, because he's a real gnarly son of a bitch. And Tom is I don't know, he's not mean, but he's not particularly friendly. I mean, I met him at San Diego Comic-Con once, and he basically gave me the cold shoulder. And if you look, if you look up Google, you put Tom Savini is on a Google search, the first time is an asshole. Come on. I don't care if Tom is an asshole. He's a genius, and he's done such great work. So I put him in The Final Test as the main character, who is a real asshole. And it's a barbarian story with a kind of a Twilight Zone twist at the end of it. He's like, he applies to this group, an unknown kind of cabal called the Protectors. And the first page, which is what I've demonstrated on the Kickstarter, he's being rejected. And they say to him, because you're whoring, your bad response in the militia, your inability to keep out of debt, you are denied. And he says, but the Protectors accept everyone. And they say, we accept every man, and you fall short. And the posts all echo, denied, denied, denied. So he goes on to this rampage through this medieval countryside in a kind of a self-appointed vigilante justice to sort of prove that he is a man. And in true Twilight Zone fashion, this one's the most Twilight Zone, there's a twist ending, which I'm not going to reveal because I really hope to get this funded so people can read it. But it'll make your head spin. It's an amazing Twilight Zone ending.
Oh, nice. I mean, the other thing, and I hate to keep jumping in here, but I've actually, this is probably neither here nor there, but I've got a guy repairing my fence, so I don't know if at any point I might have to disappear, unfortunately, to pay this guy. But
right on.
The other thing, Sam and I went, because a lot of times we go through comic books, in particular we like to go through these old comic books that have pro wrestling themes in them as well. But one of the things that we always get hung up on, and we end up doing like the majority of the show on, are the old ads, like the old those Johnson Smith catalog style ads. And it is so cool that you actually recreated like an ad, but these are all like legit people. I could see you have like the @sign, so these are all going to people's Instagrams or something, which is just totally amazing.
World's Deadliest is in there too. I mean, Sam's YouTube or your Twitter is there. I put these people in because they're my friends and people that have promoted me and people that I like.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool, man. Wow.
Right, I see it. I see it down there in the bottom right. Oh,
whoa, awesome. Yeah, look, this is so cool because if you like those kind of old school ads, if you pledge to this comic, it looks like. Sorry, my dog's barking right now, but if you pledge to this comic, it's like $17. Is that it?
Yeah.
Jesse will make you your own little ad and put it in his comic. So you'll get one. So look, I mean, that's any reason. That's totally more than enough reason to pledge this thing. That $17, you'll get the book, and you'll have a little ad in the book. How cool is that? And yeah, I mean, so definitely go over this Kickstarter. We'll have it linked up in the description and show notes and stuff. Go over this Kickstarter and take a look at these pledges, because he's got a lot of really cool rewards that you can get. You can get the whole comic for only $11. Let's see, for $20 you can get the comic and a personal video.
Training video. My friends, not some of my friends, some of my pledgers have asked me to give them a training on hand inking on a private video, and you'll get private access for it for an entire month. Just me talking to you about how to ink.
That's cool. Let's see, you can get like $25. You can get an original art panel plus the comic. So definitely, I would definitely recommend going over and looking at all these rewards and picking some of them up. The one I got was original art. You get like a splash page, I think, or something, which looks pretty awesome. So definitely jump on this. For people that don't know about those old Warren magazines and Savage Sword of Conan and stuff, why don't we talk about the impetus of like what brought those types of magazines into the marketplace? Because they didn't really exist prior much to the 70s and maybe the late 60s. But they did, the pulp magazine we know was around before the Golden Age comics. We had the pulp magazines were massively popular, like Weird Tales and Amazing Fantasy and stuff. And we've talked about that stuff on the podcast here before. But let's talk about those.
Well, sure. The comics moved in when the pulps moved out. And the reason that those things switched over was, I think, largely because they aimed at a younger audience. Because the pulps were, well, not particularly for adults, but they were reading. It was text, and it was not easy. So when kids started buying the comics, there was this really tough time because the pulps were pretty goddamn lurid. Like, there was like, you read a Conan story by Robert A. Howard, I mean, there's like raping and there's, lots of violence and heaving bosoms, and comic code at that time didn't exist, eh? They didn't have that approved by the comic code. So there was a lot of hair-raising stuff. And if you look at some of those old ECs, they're pretty, intense. Then the Nazis came in and they blocked it. Not the real Nazis, the comic Nazis came in and they choked off that element, and the comics basically fell away from their lurid beginnings. And Mad magazine's been on the rise. Now, Mad also used to toe the edge very close, and throughout all those years they were a little less intense. But then the 70s comes around, and the 70s with the sort of changing of the zeitgeist and the kind of moving a little bit. If you've watched one of my videos, the word further, I use a video about the counterculture in science fiction, and further is a word that was, typified by the merry pranksters and Ken Kesey and his, quest across the United States in a hippie bus to sort of blow his mind, and further, spelled with a U, means go farther and try to push the boundaries. And the 70s was a lot about that. You can see it in the rock and roll, you can see it in the thing, and there's many parts of that I think went astray and became kind of really, really the beginning of a lot of problems that we have nowadays. But it did open up an opportunity for sort of this more lurid stuff to come back in, and the 60s was on the verge of that, but the 70s really let it in, and these comics flooded back in. You got Dracula, the Vault of Horror. You got Savage Sword of Conan coming out, and Savage Sword of Conan actually was preceded by Savage Tales, which had nudity in it. Savage Sword of Conan does have some nudity in it too, but it changed as the 80s came on. But that lurid, dark kind of element was just part of that time frame, I mean, it was heavy metal was on the rise, and Ozzy Osbourne and the darkness of things was very compelling to people, and it was really an opportunity for these, I don't know if you want to say lowbrow, but the kind of stuff that a carnival sideshow barker would, attract you. Come and see the two-headed woman and this sort of stuff. And there's always an interest in society for that darker side of things. And it was cleaned out for a long time, and it came back thunderously in the 70s, and that is missing again today. I think things are not. I wouldn't say that they're not lurid, but they aren't the same kind of. I don't know. They're the same style of comics that you see since like the 90s onward. It's this kind of really glossy, kind of really, I don't know, topical stories that are about like seeing people do selfies and hanging out with their cell phones. That's not at all what those comics in those days were like. They weren't anything in a time period. If you pick up a 70s comic, and I charge you, go ahead and do it, there'll be no time references to the 70s in it. None at all. It'll be a story that just sits on its own, and it'll be as good as it was then, and it'll be as good as it is 50 years from now. It's got nothing tying it to its time. But if you see a Marvel comic and it says a kid taking a selfie, you know, like that'll be silly when the next thing comes. It'll just look dated and dumb.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I remember that because I went through and was looking at a long time ago, like all the old covers and stuff to like Weird Tales, and there's some pretty heavy stuff on those images on those covers. Like you're like, wow, this was like the 1920s and stuff. And I'm like, I can't believe they were getting away with putting this stuff on the newsstands just because you don't see imagery like that around much anymore.
No, man. Whipping women and stuff. Lots of women being whipped in those pictures.
yeah, that's true. There was a lot of that. Like kind of like bondage type stuff like that, and monsters, villains, occult creatures. You know, even we've talked about like Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Like before they created Superman, they were trying to do a comic called like Dr. Occult.
Oh yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they published it like in a fanzine, and I don't know if it got picked up or not, but it didn't hit well. And then Superman was what hit big for them.
Well, it's all escapism, you know. People want to see these things that are not like America in the 50s or America in the 40s. They want to see something wild. Like there was like a lot of success with those pulp stories because they were dealing with these kind of, I don't know if you want to say, they were like foreign stories, things about the parts of the world where people had never been. Like, you don't know if you know the Fu Manchu stories. Do you know those ones?
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with them, but I know of them.
Sure. Well, Fu Manchu is like a story that goes all over the world, and it's set in these wild places. And Robert E. Howard did the same with his various different properties outside of Conan. And I think it was a real escapism for people to see these stories that are kind of set in like these far-off places with villains that are bigger than life. And this is the key. And this is what Strange Adventures, why I wanted to do it. Pulp mags, the early comics, all of this, the bad guy is a bad guy. And the good guy is a good guy. It's not this kind of weirdo thing where the bad guy is like a good guy and the good guy is kind of a bad guy. Like say, I don't know, you might find in a movie like The Watchmen or a comic like The Watchmen. Like you're like, who's the bad guy? Well, we're all just people, and that's I'm against that. I don't mean to say I think there's no place for it. I just personally don't want that. I want a story about like Fu Manchu, the villain that's trying to destroy the world, or you know, Ingretta in my story. She's a good girl. Like there's this style of comics from the 80s called good girl comics, and it's about, you know, a girl who gets herself into trouble and she gets her clothes ripped off. That's what it is. She's a good girl, and she's going against the bad guys.
Yeah. No,
I think the role of all those pulps and all those like fantasy magazines, I think for young people today, that's been all replaced. It used to all be in magazines, because I remember, man, when I would get my Johnson Smith catalog, I would look at that thing every day I would read it like 100 times, read every word, because there was no internet, you know, and you're bored as hell when you're a little kid. I mean, if you're not drawing, you're like, you know, looking at comic books and stuff. I used to have stuff memorized, but that's gone now, because I think all of that freak show stuff has been replaced by the internet.
You're right. That's a good point. I didn't even include that. That's a good point.
You know, like the carny, you're talking about all these like lurid things that people get lured. Well, now it's like the internet. It's like, oh yeah, check out this porn. Check out this crazy YouTube channel of a cat. And, you know, it's that same freak show kind of thing, but it's all digital and on your phone instead of in a magazine.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that into my theory now. That's a great idea. The Carney Barker, the sideshow has been replaced by the corners of YouTube. You're totally right, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, I feel like it's not as creative, it's not as artistic as what we had. The corners of YouTube are, I mean, they're basically just like a cesspool that's just devouring itself over and over again, it seems. And I don't know. It's unfortunate, but it's cool that you're making steps to try to bring back some good art. You know, one of the guys that we talked about, you talked about, mentioned a bunch. Robert E. Howard, the guy who created Conan and wrote all the original stories. One of the things you talk about sometimes in some of your YouTube videos and stuff is like this idea of like Robert E. Howard's, like the Robert E. Howard like worldview. Could you talk about that a little bit? Maybe explain that, what that's all about.
Okay. Well, Robert E. Howard was a Texan, and everything that goes with that was appropriate for him. He was a manly man, and he lived in a very lousy part of Texas in a depression, and he had dreams of being somewhere else, but he was a man of his place. And the story is that he'd read every book in the Cross Plains Library. Cross Plains, Texas is where he lived, and that might be a tall tale, but he was very erudite. You know, he knew what he was talking about, and he knew a ton about the history of the world. And what Robert E. Howard had come up with, now take it or leave it, it's not a philosophy that's necessary for you to believe and to appreciate. He believed that man in his state of being essential, that is, without all of the trappings of modernity around him, was the most honest version of what he could be. And he is in that state, according to Robert E. Howard, barbaric. That means he responds immediately to situations. He doesn't affect different sort of contrivances regarding his appearance. He is interested in the ends of things rather than debating how to get there. He's a man of action. And Conan, Robert E. Howard's character, typifies this. And there's literally speeches in different stories, most notably, I would say, the story called Wolves Beyond the Border, where they have characters speak straightforward that the barbaric man is the man that's going to achieve this world, and the civilized man is the one that's going to bring it to its knees. And Howard felt that very earnestly.
Yeah, philosophically, that's like Thomas Hobbes, right? That life is nasty, brutal, and short, and you know that the ends justify the means, and that kind of thing, which is very much the barbarian kind of approach to life.
Yeah, and you could throw in a healthy dose of libertarianism in there. Just you're there to do it for your own sake, and you're not interested in all of the nuance of why and the wherefore. You're there to gain for your own sake. Yeah,
I'm very Ayn Rand in a way.
It is almost that, and I think that Howard would probably have hated Ayn Rand because of the fact that she was very, very insular and focused, and Howard liked to look out into the world in different places. He was a correspondent with H.P. Lovecraft. They were contemporaries, and they wrote letters to each other, and they'd always debate which is the more profound version of society, civilization, as Lovecraft would argue, and Howard would say barbarism was the one.
So
yeah, it's fascinating. Are those letters published anywhere? That would be fascinating to read.
Yeah,
absolutely. I have them in my collection. You can find them yourself. I can't recall off the top of my head what the title of the book is, but they're probably something like The Correspondences of Lovecraft and Howard. They're published.
Wow, that would be fascinating.
For sure. So what are some of the what are some of the arguments for the two sides of that debate that those guys would have?
Okay, well, Howard's outline was outlined basically by the kind of claim that men are more direct when they're in touch with their primitive side, and that they have within them no hesitation. You see, Conan, in one particular novel or short story called The Devil in Iron, he is fighting against essentially an iron golem. like it's a god that's been resurrected, but he's essentially an iron golem. His skin is impervious. It can't do anything. A sword can't do anything to it. And Conan realizes pretty fast in their struggle that this thing has got, the edge on him by a long shot. And this is perfect Howard theory here. Conan throws a sort of an unbelievably heavy drapery over this thing and tangles it and runs for it. And he goes up this staircase with his girlfriend in his hand, and he slams this iron door. And he locks it, and there's no exit out of this thing. And this is what Conan does, and this is like the mouthpiece or the psychology of Howard. There's nothing to do in this moment, because there's no way out, and the beast named Khosatral charges up the stairs, and Howard describes him coming up like a juggernaut, and he starts pounding against the steel door. And Conan is looking at the door, and he starts to see the inward buckling, and he realizes he's going to get through. And what does Conan do? Just like Qui-Gon Jinn in the prequel story, he sits down. He sits down. Why? Because there's no reason to be all nervous. Just like Qui-Gon. You see that sequence with Qui-Gon, and you see behind him young Kenobi. Young Kenobi's pacing around, and you see the Sith Lord, what was his name?
Darth Maul.
Darth Maul is looking like a tiger, but Qui-Gon sits down. And Conan sits down. I felt half a mind they read this story because it seems so similar. And why this is connected to Robert E. Howard's philosophy is that Conan is not worried about anything. He's the essential man. He knows when that door breaks, he's going to struggle as hard as he can, and he actually gives a dialogue to the girl with him saying, I'll do my best, and I want you to boot it out this door while it's open, and I'm going to go down. But I'm going to fight it as hard as I possibly can. But at this moment, I'm going to rest. And I thought, my God, that is so essential, man. Like, you're not panicking, you're not pacing, you're not doing anything, you're just waiting. It's almost Zen, And that was Howard's idea about the essential man. Now, Lovecraft's idea was, of course, that civilization is where men come together, and he also saw it as being a place of terror because the inner workings of things often find themselves kind of unraveling at the edges, and the cosmic horror would penetrate in the outside of it. But he wasn't a believer that the primitive man was able to sort of negotiate these places, because his concepts are always about, I would say, lineages of men that happen to be highborn and they have within themselves a great learning. You can see deep references to their scholarship and everything that they do in the reading of the Necronomicon, and it always unfurls as a kind of a cosmic madness that's to do with their long lineage of being within this place. His stories have horror of like ancient decay in a civilization, and Howard's stories are always about like almost a prehistoric, primeval kind of place where it's pitted man against beast, and in Lovecraft it's kind of civilization against the kind of ancient cosmic horror that's held at the fringes of civilization. And that's what they would debate about.
Oh, that's fascinating, man. Hearing you explain that really inspires me to kind of want to go back and reread all those old works.
Oh yeah, they're worth it. I mean, and Howard himself has so many stories outside of Conan, and Lovecraft's got hundreds of stories.
Yeah, I've got like a couple of Lovecraft's, like thick volumes of his work, and I'll admit I have not read all of them at all.
Yeah, me neither. I haven't either. I have them all on my iPad, and I work through them when I'm doing something like going to sleep at night. Sometimes I read through them. There's some real dumb ones, but boy, they're really good. I mean, they're really good.
Yeah, I'm more interested in reading the correspondences, to be honest. That sounds absolutely fascinating because, their aesthetics were so completely different. Like you're mentioning. I mean, Lovecraft is so like creeping and black and, just like cosmic horror. Yeah. Whereas Howard is just very much about the flesh and about primacy of experience and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's so much more, it's like masculine, whereas it seems like Lovecraft is more intellectual.
It's cerebral. Yeah, you're totally right. And you got it exactly right. Howard's about the muscular effort of a man, and Howard's is more about the kind of corruption of the mind, I think.
Yeah.
They all insane, they always descend into insanity.
Yeah, that's fascinating for sure. No, I'm glad I was able to talk to you about that and get your input on that. I think it's real interesting. And I think it's cool because, look, people that are listening to this realize, like, I want them to realize, like, how much, you've really studied and applied yourself towards all this subject matter, and it informs your art and it informs your own stories and the things that you're trying to make now. And so I think if people know that, they should get behind your projects, and hopefully we'll get more people over to your Kickstarter and supporting it. It looks like you have about 15 days or so left. And it definitely needs some more help to get all the way to its funding goal.
Yeah, it does. I really need your help out there, and I think that you'll like it if you're a fan of any of these things we're talking about. I tried to weave each of these kinds of concepts. Every single one we've talked about has an element. There's a Lovecraftian element in one of the stories, and I think that, I don't know, I don't see a kind of a other piece of writing out there that's kind of like this. I would buy my comic if I were the author of it.
Yeah, I mean, it really does remind me of that old Creepshow graphic novel. And I was like, I still have that to this day. It's totally falling apart and everything else, because I'm not like a collector. I just keep looking at them and stuff. But this has that same vibe and that same sexiness to it, but horror. It looks really exciting.
Yeah, there's a real straightforward horror story in my mag too. Scott Seppi wrote that one, and it's called Madigal Island, and it's a straightforward horror. A bunch of kids in Alaska graduate in 1957, and they find themselves on the shore of an island as a lark on a graduation prank. Just one of these small rocky islands in the Pacific Northwest, like where I live. There's all these little puny islands off the coast, and they decide on a really low tide to go down there, and they descend into a cyclone of horror, zombie horror that unrolls.
I just love you're so excited by your own project too. I mean, you can tell you got real passion for it. You're cackling evilly as you know what's going to happen to these poor teenagers.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I've worked at it for a very long time, and I brought it to a level of completion. It's not totally complete because my wife and I we have a house to maintain and a mortgage to pay, and I work as an illustrator outside of comic books in my normal life, and I have a lot of jobs outside of the comics that I have to fulfill. But I've been working at this for a long time, and I decided to put it out there at the state that it's in, hoping that I could get something back for it. And my fingers are crossed. I really hope there's some people out there that like it.
It looks amazing. And guys, I'm really sorry, but I've actually got to go take care of my fence, unfortunately. So I've got to duck out. But I wish you the best of luck with this project. It looks absolutely amazing, Jesse.
Thanks, Jake. Thank you.
All right, Jake. Thanks, Jake. I'll catch up with you later, okay?
Yeah. Enjoy, guys. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
No, so what I was going to say, Jesse, if this project, if it doesn't go, if it doesn't make it, it's not because of the quality or a problem with the project. I really just think it's a matter of not getting on a big enough distribution channel where enough people are aware of it. And that seems to be the challenge, and that's kind of seems to be the challenge with everything on the internet these days. With so much competition for attention, it's just hard to get people to pay attention to the stuff that actually has value, that's actually cool.
I really appreciate that, and it's really nice to hear it. There's moments where you get really depressed about it. I've had some very depressing moments, but if you think about it really rationally, I think I've been friends with you on the internet for, I don't know, a year, more than a year. How long have we been together? Several years, perhaps. And I've known you for a while, and we've only just talked right now. And although I've probably seen your stuff around and we both retweeted each other, that network of people that I've got, which I thought was kind of, I don't know, notable, I think it needs to be 4 times that. 4 times larger.
Well, that's kind of what I'm learning now too, is because it's just like you said. It's like we the way I know Jesse is from Twitter, and we interact on there fairly regularly. I'm not on Twitter every single day because I'm in the same boat as you. I work a full-time illustration job, but all of my illustration work is outside of comics. It's mostly in commercial type stuff, and then in addition to that, I have a number of other jobs and responsibilities that I have to meet every week, and even work that I do to sustain myself outside of illustration, and so it's just super difficult to keep up on social media and everything. But yeah, I think the fact that actually, when you're using Twitter right, when you actually connect up with someone like we did today, and you actually talk to them, and now we've built more of a relationship, and hopefully I can do what I can, and hopefully more people will do the same, and help reach out to you and see what can they do to help you spread the word about this project and about your comic. And like I was saying, I just think it's if it doesn't go, don't be discouraged. I think eventually it definitely will. It's just a matter of reaching a big enough number of people becoming aware of it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'm a big believer in the old Rocky adage about it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep coming back. I'm not going anywhere, so I'm going to keep swinging at this baby, and I'm really hoping it can make it. I'm not giving up on that. I'm going to keep promoting it to the end, but it'll just be a matter of getting bigger and trying to reach out farther, and I'm going to keep going.
That's awesome, man. I think you absolutely should. I think we can. With that, we've been talking for about an hour. We can wrap it up. But before we do, anything else you wanna say or make people aware of or plug? Go ahead, or let me know.
Sure. Well, I'd just like to first say that any of those links that we were talking about will be in the description. I think that I declared the name of my YouTube channel incorrectly. It is The Pursuits of a Polymath. But Sam will put that link down there, and there's a whole suite of things that you can go through from my webpage. You'll see through my blog that I run about Andrew Dumas, and it's all about drawing technique. And there's different connections to all my different ideas out there in the media, which you can get through my webpage, which is White Knight's Illustration. But the most thing I'd like to say is to thank you to Sam. Thank you very much for having me on here. I appreciate more than I can say how open you are to having me on your show, and I've been trying really hard to connect with people, and you were the only one that took it up at first, and since then I've managed to sort of budge my way into other people. But I really appreciate what you do, and I admire your artwork, and I think that having a friend like you on the internet is a valuable thing, so thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. I was happy to do it. All the links to Jesse's work, to his Kickstarter, his YouTube, his Twitter, can be found in the description area of this podcast. Make sure you go there and check it out. If you want to follow me, Sam Cresson, on Instagram, you can find me at World's Deadliest Art. If you'd like to follow me on YouTube, you can find me at youtube.com/Sam Cresson, spelled with a K, Kressin. To follow Jake, check out Scientific Wrestling. Go to scientificwrestling.com to check out all the latest catch wrestling camps, workshops, and training. Don't forget to check out my comic book, Strength Monsters, at strengthmonsters.com. You can download the first issue there for free. It's about two professional wrestlers who have to take on a giant anthropomorphic burrito who has waged war on all the local taco shops in their community. It's filled with over 32 pages of pro wrestling, catch wrestling madness. The music on this podcast is brought to you by Incompetech.com. That's INCOMPETECH. Incompetech.com. You can go there, find all kinds of cool royalty-free music that you can use for your own podcast or any kind of projects that you're working on.